Welcome to the Political Philosophy Podcast. I'm Toby Buckle. Today's episode is another conversation about the political right, particularly in America, with Matt McManus. Matt may well be familiar to a number of you, particularly if you're online on the same sections of politics, Twitter, as I am. He's a lecturer in political science at the University of Michigan and the author of a number of books, including The Emergence of Postmodernity, Liberalism and Liberal Rights, and most recently The Political Right and Equality, which is what we discuss here, and he also has an upcoming book project on liberal socialism. We start there, and then towards the end of the conversation we get into just sort of a general discussion of where we see liberalism, progressivism, and the left in America today, and where we see them going. So it was a really engaging back and forth. I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoy having it. One slight note is, like the Kevin Valier conversation, I recorded this one at the tail end of last year, and I'm releasing it now. So it's some of the current event references we make might be a few months out of date, but I listened to it back and I think it pretty much largely stands up. So apologies to Matt for the delay, and apologies to the audience for the delay in episodes getting out. Life events happen and sometimes this project has to be deprioritized, but I'm aiming to get back up now. This and the Kevin Valier conversation are both really interesting discussions, and I've just recorded another interview as well that'll be coming out probably in the next few weeks. So yeah, let's get straight into it. This is The Political Right and Equality with Matt McManus. Okay, I am joined today by Matt McManus. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here. Long-time listener, so it's great to be a first-time contributor.
Yeah, that's terrific. And you were just saying before you came on that we were talking about the Helen McCabe interview, who you said is a friend, which is a cool connect.
Yeah, Helen's great. I mean, her book on John Stuart Mill's socialism was really formative for me. She's also just a wonderfully collaborative personality, and frankly, just a very nice person, right? So, and I think that really came through in the interview. So, she definitely, that interview definitely inspired me to reach out to you and see if you're interested in having this talk, because you seem like a nice guy. So,
cheers. Do you want to tell, just to get started, do you want to tell the audience a bit about yourself? Like, what are the sorts of issues you've worked on and written about, and what interests you?
Sure. So I'm currently a lecturer in political science at the University of Michigan, where I teach on a whole array of different issues that include things like constitutional theory, political theory, citizenship and democracy. But the stuff that I write about kind of falls into two camps. Some of my writings focus on liberal socialism, offering a defense of it, a history of it, and that's actually the subject of my new book that I'm working on right now, or at least that I should be working on right now for Routledge. And then the other focus of my writings is on the history of the political right, termed very broadly, right? That includes the history of conservatism, but also fascism, the far right, and various other movements of that sort. And within both of those kind of camps, I have more popular writings that are released in things like Jacobin magazine, Current Affairs. I have a new one coming out in The Nation, which I'm very excited about. But I also have more academic stuff that's pitched towards that audience as well. That include things like my books, The Rise of Postmodern Conservatism, or my book, The Emergence of Postmodernity at the Intersection of Liberalism, Capitalism, and Secularism.
And your one that we're going to do today, The Political Right and Equality. What got you interested in writing about the political right? Because I'm not going to say it's not done. It's definitely less done by political theorists than, say, writing about one of the many subspecies of liberalism or socialism. There is less writing on the contemporary right. That has changed somewhat post-Trump, but 20 years ago there was very little at all, not much that was good, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people just accepted Lionel Trilling's conception of the right as a series of irritable mental gestures that sought to resemble ideas rather than anything that was substantive in and of itself. And I want to point out that I reject that conception of the right very emphatically. Just to be clear, as a liberal socialist, I am definitely not a right winger, right? And the book is a critique of the right. But I would hope that any conservative or right winger that reads the book would appreciate the care that I tried to put into analyzing the ideas of some of its seminal figures, many of whom were men of great insight and even genius, no matter how much I might happen to disagree with their ideas. In terms of why I chose to write on this subject, I guess there were largely three reasons, right? One was just intellectual curiosity, right? Isaiah Berlin once said that sometimes he gets tired of reading Friends because there's a kind of familiarity that's associated with that. Reading The Enemy can be interesting because the enemy penetrates one's defenses. And that's always been the experience I've had reading any of these people. My friend Sam Adler-Bell at the Know Your Enemy podcast once said that the experience of being a leftist reading conservatives is kind of odd since you just sit there looking at a text, realizing that there's this very smart person and wondering how they could get things so wrong, and then wondering maybe in the depth of your heart whether it's actually you who might be wrong, right? And that's an exhilarating experience for somebody like me because it's a kind of intellectual challenge to dwell in that space and yet at the same time surmount it. So that's purely the intellectual reason. I suppose the more personal reason in terms of my background is, I had kind of a weird upbringing, right? I was raised in the Roman Catholic Church at a time when, it was a pretty conservative institution, just coming off of anti-communism. The town that I grew up in was also a pretty conservative place. All my friends from back home, were very, we're going to vote, blue because that's what the right thing to do and it's the manly thing to do. It's odd, actually. The leader of Canada's Conservative Party is now the member of Parliament for the riding I grew up in, right? So that'll tell you a little bit about the place that I grew up in. And partly for that reason, I was always exposed not so much to conservative ideas, but to conservative attitudes and dispositions, even though I never happened to agree with a lot of them, right? And so I think that in a lot of ways that prepared me personally to write a book like this. And then I guess the third and very cliche reason was the one that you just mentioned. In 2016, when Donald Trump was elected, I, like everybody else, was genuinely shocked. I'm never going to forget. I had organized a kind of election watch party where me and all my leftist friends, we're doing the normal thing of talking about how Hillary Clinton was a neoliberal shill, yada, yada, yada. We're going to have to do our best to actually try to push her towards the left or to radicalize the Democrat agenda. And then, of course, we all know what happened. The big orange man won. And the world completely changed in many ways, certainly in North America. And this persuaded me to do something that I hadn't done for quite a while at that point, which is to go back and reread or read for the first time, in some cases, a lot of the classic texts of the political right to try to understand intellectually what the genealogy of Trumpism was. And that was quite a long project, let's put it that way. It's not even a project that's finished yet, since I still read an awful lot of right-wing literature to try to keep abreast of it. But the end result, at least for now, is the book that you read, The Political Right and Equality.
It's interesting. This is sort of just a personal reflection as well. I mean, as we were talking about just before we came on, I started the podcast around the same time, about, I think, just after the Trump election. And a lot of what I featured on has been reflections sort of spurred by that moment, as well as the Brexit moment, which, although its historical causes are quite different, is often mentioned in the same breath as Trump. There's no way to say this without sounding smarmy and I told you so, but, whatever. I wasn't especially surprised by Trump's victory, and that was kind of a weird space to be in, because I viewed him more as a continuation of not of certain currents of where the American right and Republican Party had been for a while, and his election more of a confirmation of where we were at, a revealing perhaps to people who had the blinkers on. And so it's been a weird perspective for me in many ways to watch people both. I was just before that with Working Families Party in New York, who you're probably familiar with, like a lefty third party, who were very much in the sort of mindset that you described of, Hillary Clinton is a neoliberal shill, but also not taking Trump especially seriously, as like not someone they really thought could win. And then, on the more liberal centre, there was certainly a complacency there too. Like, I think the people, Hillary Clinton and the people who worked for her, were really profoundly shocked to their core about they really did not put much probability of this in their heads. And so it's been interesting, and it's almost like just like a hammer striking at something, and everyone's sort of flown off in a million different directions, and people have really revised their views in some cases, really doubled down on their views in others. But like that moment was a real impetus for a lot of people from a lot of different parts of the spectrum to go, hang on, I need to think about stuff differently. And it's always been interesting for me as someone who was like, yeah, that kind of gels with what I thought I already knew, to sort of, one, not take it, I could have been right by accident, right? And two, just sort of observe how much of like a pivot point it's been for so many different types of people. Anyway.
No, I think that you're absolutely right, especially for people in my generation, millennials, right? It was kind of the second big punch that we experienced after the Bush administration, right? Which really kind of calcified a lot of people's viewpoints on what conservatism is. And I want to say that at the time, while I was surprised, in hindsight, I think that the path to Trumpism from the, say, Newt Gingrich party of the 1990s is a lot clearer, right? That wasn't something that I was aware of at the time, just because I hadn't really looked into these subject matters in too much depth, right? I mean, a lot of my efforts from 2008 to 2016 were focused on, criticizing the Obama administration for, a lot of its neoliberal policies, or most certainly its foreign policy, refusing to shut down Guantanamo Bay, that kind of thing. And so this was most certainly a big pivot for me. But I think it was also a healthy thing in many ways because, like I said, while it's certainly been an odd journey, spending an awful lot of time with right-wing thinkers, one of the things that I will say is that it's been an extremely edifying journey that's helped me clarify a lot of my own convictions about liberal socialism, precisely by dealing with them and being able to formulate my own views through contrast, right? So I don't want to sit there and say that I'm appreciative of the fact that Trump entered into office, because I'm not, right? I think that he had a horrible effect on the world and that thousands of people died as a result of his policies, maybe even tens of thousands, if we count, what went on with the border. But personally, right, it's been an important catalyst for me to think through things a lot more deeply than I would have otherwise.
Yeah. And I think paying attention to popular conservatism, which you do, and I think people have a bit more recently, if you paid attention only to, let's just call it elite, the people who write in National Review and all that, Trump would have been quite surprising. But if you if you follow, Rush Limbaugh as probably the sort of origin figure here, right, that a lot of people have followed in the footsteps of, or just sort of like Fox News opinion, right?
Oh, yeah.
Trump isn't really that far outside of that in a lot of ways. And I think if you paid attention to like where popular conservatism was at, the narrative of Trump is continuation, evolution, certainly changing in some respects, but that makes a lot more sense than if you're merely looking at, say, the intellectual output of the right, or sort of quote unquote, you know what I mean, the elite output of the right. And I think there has been, you can mention, and I think in my field, like podcasting and sort of content creation, we've got a bit better with this. There's been a lot more focus on looking at critiquing, obviously. You mentioned the Know Your Enemy pod. I'd also, I don't know if you listen to 5-4 on the, yeah.
No, they're great. I mean, honestly, don't tell my students this, but sometimes before I teach a class on constitutional theory, I'll listen to what the 5-4 people have to say about it and liberally draw upon some of their ideas because it's very helpful. And actually, I've recommended it to them. So I've recommended the 5-4 podcast to some of my students also. So hopefully I'm doing my part to pay them back.
But yeah, I think more recently there has been a focus on like where the sort of popular right is at and like looking at that. But and drawing, and what I like about 5-4 is drawing a direct continuum between your Fox News people and, say, your Supreme Court justice. You know, like understanding them as part of the same universe. I think Trump was shocking to a lot of people because there wasn't that understanding and focus at the time.
Oh, I absolutely agree, right? And one of the things that I consistently say about Trump now, right, again, with the benefit of hindsight, is many American conservatives were shocked by his radicalism. And some of them even kind of reverted to the crudest kind of posturing by saying, listen, conservatism is supposed to be about conserving, right? And there doesn't seem to be very much conserving that Trump wants to do at all. This was the basic, thesis of people like Jonah Goldberg or George Will, right? More classical liberal, ordered liberty kind of conservatives on the American right. And my response to people like that would be that that's an absurd view to take of the American right. Let's go back to Barry Goldwater, right? Barry Goldwater was the first major conservative candidate for president in a very long while, kind of supposed to be the coming out moment for the entire American right. And he famously said, extremism in defense of liberty is no vice whatsoever. Flash forward, just to the 1980s, Ronald Reagan is paraphrasing Thomas Paine, the famous revolutionary, by saying, we have it in our power to make the world anew. Then you go to the 2000s. Karl Rove talks about how the fact-based community has really no idea what the Bush administration is trying to do because they aren't in the business of trying to figure out what the facts of the world are. They're in the business of trying to remake the world. Their history as actors, and the fact-based community and all of its kind of nebbish intellectuals are just going to sit back and record what the truly great men of history are going to create for them. So seen from that standpoint, there's always been a very pronounced radical quality, even counter-revolutionary quality to the American right that's been staring us in the face from the very beginning. I just don't think that a lot of people paid very much attention to it the way that they should.
I think, I'm going to let you go on this, but before I give my opinion, I think there's an attention problem. There's also, to some degree there, both among the sort of elite conservatives and liberal commentators, a sort of conceptual confusion about what conservatism is. I'll let you go first. What is conservatism? How would we define this in broad strokes?
Well, I think what I'll do is define the political right first, and then I'll describe conservatism as a subspecies of that.
Oh, that's interesting. You see, you wouldn't use those terms broadly synonymously.
I wouldn't, no. I mean, sometimes I do. I want to be clear, right? Particularly in my more popular writings. But from an academic standpoint, I think it's necessary.
No, I'm not even challenging. That's a question from genuine curiosity.
Not a problem, right? It's important to analytically decouple them. So my conviction is that the political right is committed to this idea that there are recognizably superior people in society. This was Hayek's definition, and I think that is broadly correct in his essay, Why I'm Not a Conservative. And these recognizable superior people are entitled to higher degrees of status, higher degrees of affluence, higher degrees of political agency, just across the board, really. Now, how one conceives of a recognizably superior person is extremely variegated on the political right. And more or less every right-wing thinker and every right-wing movement has a different definition or understanding of what a recognizably or demonstrably superior person is. But there's always one that is built in to their ideological framework. And conservatism, in many ways, is a kind of defensive reaction to movements of the left to try to preserve or conserve, really, the privileges, status, and power of groups that conservatives regard as the appropriate leaders, the appropriate lead of any given society. And usually they justify this by saying that this group has proven itself over a long period of time to be the best elite for running society, or the most deserving elite for running society. And it's a very popular variation of right-wing thought for a wide variety of different reasons, but it's by no means exhaustive, right? So you can contrast conservatism with, say, the radical right or the counter-revolutionary right, embodied in the thinking of people like Nietzsche or Vola, right, or even Heidegger, where typically what these figures will argue is that actually conservatism has largely failed to check the advancing forces of liberalism and socialism. And one of the reasons it's failed is because conservative elites just really don't deserve to be elites, right? They're kind of flabby, they're gerontic, they don't actually possess the qualities that one needs in a genuine elite. So what's required isn't conservatism, but the radical transformation of society to establish a new kind of hierarchical order that'll be a lot more stable and a lot more enduring and a lot more resistant to progressive change than the one that conservatives would want.
Yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, I see. And let me think through this a lot. Certainly when I do like an ideological topology in my head, I would put fascism and conservatism distinctly. There's overlap, but I'm not going to go as far as saying they are the same, even if we might say there are fascistic elements. I would say that about many contemporary right figures. I guess you could still, let me think about this. Yeah, you could still draw a common core in that you could say across the spectrum that you've defined, there is still a belief in a sort of natural and inevitable social order of extra-human origins. The distinctions are in just how radical we are willing to be in order to restore that. You could draw a common thread out there.
No, absolutely, right. And I should add that, not all people on the political right approach issues of hierarchicalization or understand recognizably superior persons in the same way, right? In fact, there's a vast array of different views on this subject matters. So some conservatives are quite willing to conciliate with elements of liberal modernity, including egalitarian liberal modernity, if they feel that the appropriate elite will nonetheless still enjoy certain kind of privileges and certain kinds of agency in society. And this is why, for instance, in the United States, there's long been an attempt to kind of fuse a sort of traditionalist conservatism with classical liberalism, right? If you think about like Frank Meyer, like fusionism. And this was viable for a long period of time, right? But it's by no means necessary for people on the political right to attempt to conciliate themselves with liberalism or with democracy in this kind of way. And very often, historically, they have done exactly the opposite, right? They were the first militant opponents of advancing liberalism, democracy, and the welfare state. And even though in many ways they've conciliated themselves with the first, at least in the Anglosphere, sometimes the older forms of conservatism or the older forms of the political right will rear their head again, and you'll start to see them nip at the bud of things like liberal demands for progress, which is exactly what I think you're seeing right now.
Yeah, and so to put this, because I agree with you that we should understand conservatism as a desire to conserve, but not necessarily as a desire to conserve existing institutions. Like, say what you will about the Trump project or the Brexit. Conserving existing institutions is not what these people are about, It's a desire to conserve a social ordering. I think on the left we call it a hierarchy. They don't like that word, but a social ordering that to some degree is inevitable and preservable and predictable. And I think the thing that trips people up when they first start thinking about conservatism is just that they conflate the desire to preserve a particular social order with the desire to preserve existing social institutions. And they're not the same thing. And because conservatives don't necessarily see that social order as being represented in existing institutions. And to the extent that it's not, conservatives will want to change existing social institutions in order to get us back to that underlying order. And when they feel like the two are out of whack to a considerable degree, conservatives can be very, very radical in trying to return us to whatever it is they believe that constitutes that social order, be it the laws of God, the laws of the free market, innate gender roles, racial hierarchies, what have you. But to the extent that they feel that we've gotten away from that, they can be very, very radical indeed about trying to return us to it. And that's not a contradiction. It's not like I think a lot of liberals feel like, oh, well, you say you're a conservative and yet you talk about making the world anew. No, they're just their conception of society and social change is just fundamentally different to ours.
No, absolutely. Corey Robin made this point in his book, The Reactionary Mind, which is that when conservatives feel that liberalism or socialism or progressivism has been, this is his term, in the driver's seat for a very long time, they can often reach the conclusion that there's really nothing valuable left to conserve. So they adopt the future as their preferred political tense, right? Expectation being that the new kind of society that they're going to create will be better than the one they exist in right now, which is not a conservative impulse in the sense of wanting to conserve existing institutions if they seem to be servicing liberal or progressive ends. And there are just myriad examples of this. Probably the one that is most striking for me, anecdotally, is William F. Buckley used to go tour college campuses in the United States, and various clever professors would say things like, well, you talk about conserving social institutions and how we need to be respectful or venerate our established traditions. Well, the New Deal has been around now for 20, 30 years. It seems to have become part of the American consensus. Everybody from, Eisenhower Republicans to obviously, Kennedy Democrats tend to support it. Why would you want to get rid of that? And Buckley would usually just laugh at that, saying, believe me, when we get in office, there's going to be nothing left of the New Deal. And that's, of course, going to entail radical transformations of the status quo, as indeed exactly happened when Nixon and later Reagan came into office, right? So conservatives are interested sometimes in conserving various kinds of social institutions that they feel are conducive to allowing recognizably superior people to perform the role they are supposed to play in society. But they have usually very little interest in conserving institutions that they align with decadent or disintegrationist forces, even if they have a long-standing history in our society.
Another sort of, I think, liberal confusion about conservatism follows from this description of it, which is that there's often a perception on the left, on liberalism, by anyone on sort of our side of the spectrum, that there's something radically incoherent between conservatism's more libertarian and more authoritarian commitments. So concretely, people will say things like, oh, you claim to be about individual rights and keeping the government off our back when it comes to taxes or guns, and yet you're very supportive of strong state power when it comes to policing, and you're very against Black Lives Matter, talking about police violence, and you're very for government control of people's bodies when it comes to abortion or gay rights or something like that, right? You know the sentiment I'm expressing, that it's seen as being a radical disjunction. And I wrote an article recently for someone, in which what I said was, it's not incoherent, it's just not coherent with the liberal value of universality. It's not incoherent, it just runs afoul of our liberal value of equality before the law or broad equality in a rules-based order or something like that. But once you grant the idea that the rules and the weight of the state should apply differentially to different groups, it's just a very different moral vision. The idea is that there's a true citizenry who should be protected by the law, and for that true citizenry, libertarian norms govern. But then there are the enemies within. Choose your social scapegoat, poor people, black people, non-Christians, what have you, for whom the law is there to repress. And it's not incoherent, it's not a good, in my opinion, moral view of the world. But I think there's this idea that conservatives are just like absolutely, both from policy to morals, absolutely fundamentally contradicting themselves between the libertarian and the authoritarian impulses. And that goes away once you realise that they just don't believe, and I think a lot of the modern writers never really even pretended to believe in universality. The libertarian bit is for the true citizenry, and the authoritarian bit is for everyone else. And they're quite straightforward in telling us that.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a popular meme that went around through the 2010s, which is that the essence of conservatism boils down to this, right? That there are some people that the law should protect but not bind, and other people who the law should bind and not protect, right? Now, that's not entirely accurate or exhaustive of conservatism, but it's not a bad shorthand, right? And you can see this all throughout the tradition, right? So just, two examples, right? Both Edmund Burke and Thomas Sowell spend an awful lot of time talking about human difference, right? Whether it's talking about they're talking about the little brigades that make up society, or they're talking about the fundamental differences in people's economic capabilities, the fundamental differences in their culture, the fundamental differences in their basic talents, right? You name it, right? Conservatives are very interested, oftentimes, in the things that differentiate people, but differentiate them in ways that allow them to be ranked and organized, right? And I think this is something that the left sometimes struggles to understand because we often think of the language of difference as inherently progressive, right? That we want, a nice rainbow-colored society where unique differences are allowed to express themselves without any kind of pressure to conform to an overarching social pattern, right? Conservatives also have a theory of difference, but it's in this much more hierarchical vein. And once you understand this, it's a lot easier to understand why it is that they would say exactly what you just said, that there are some people in society who possess, the kind of attributes and qualities that entitle them to maximal agency, right? Political agency, economic agency, cultural agency, and they should not be bound in certain kinds of ways. If anything, it's their job to bind other people because they know how to exercise power appropriately, right? And then everybody else in society, well, they're the serfs. They're the hired help. They don't need, maximal agency. They might not very well not need agency at all. And Burke, for instance, is very clear about this in Reflections on the Revolution in France, where he says, look, rights are settled by convention. Not everyone gets the same rights. And he says, I absolutely deny this idea that people get equal political rights because an aristocrat gets political agency, but a barber, right? Absolutely not, right? What does a barber need political agency for, right? And the same kind of thing is going on right now in the United States, albeit in a far cruder form than what you see iterated in Reflections on the Revolution of France. Think about Vivek Ramaswamy, right? Where he's sitting there like, look, if you can't pass a citizenship test and you're not over the age of 25, you shouldn't be allowed to vote because you don't know enough to participate in the governance of the state, even though, of course, the state will still govern you, right? You need to demonstrate that you've earned the right to participate in politics. Very much in line with this broader conservative tradition.
Right. And so what follows from a view of the world that fundamentally is based in a hierarchical, natural, or at least in some sense inevitable social order, is you get a real focus on the immutability of at least some human characteristics that are different between people or between groups, because those two ideas make sense and support each other, right? Just as liberalism or socialism needs human nature to be quite changeable for it to make sense, if we are going to do some, to take the most extreme case, radical communist utopia, the people who live in that utopia are going to have
a fully automated luxury communism, right?
Yeah, but whoever lives in luxury communism is going to have to be a very different type of human being than the people who live in this society. And so if you're going to believe in that, you have to believe that human nature can be remade. And liberalism too, perhaps in a more slower, incremental way, but still has to believe that human nature can be remade. Conservatives focus on the hierarchy and the natural inevitability of social structures means they will naturally gravitate towards views, facts, purported facts that seem immutable. It's one of the reasons, beyond, say, just simple racism, why I think they're so obsessed with, say, race and IQ and establish correlations there, is it seems to speak to some innate, unchangeable difference in the groups that has certain political implications, or one, again, beyond just general prejudicial reasons, why they've so gravitated around transgender people. Is they really are gravitating towards the idea that there are genders, you can't change them, and that has certain implications. These are very, regardless of the validity of those two scientific stroke descriptive claims about the world, and we need to get into that. Those are the types of claims about the world, the types of purported facts, which conservatism will very naturally gravitate towards. They seek examples of human difference that is innate and unchangeable.
Yeah, absolutely. And this can seem kind of strange, as you mentioned, from a liberal outlook. But this emphasis on human difference is deeply conducive to many conservatives yearning for a sense of not just political, but indeed metaphysical order, right?
Yes.
And I talk about this in my book where I discuss the Aristotelian worldview, right? We don't need to get too much into detail with this because when I talk about the Aristotelian worldview, I'm not really talking about Aristotle per se, who has influenced people from Marx to Martha Nussbaum, including a huge number of progressives, right? But the Aristotelian worldview that many forms of conservatism are nostalgic for is one where the universe is rigidly hierarchical, where there's higher and or lower orders of being. And this also maps onto human society, right, where there are higher and lower kinds of human specimens, right? The great Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor calls this a model of hierarchical complementarity that's applied to our imaginary of society, right? And in this kind of social imaginary, everyone has their place, and as long as they stay in their place and they understand their place, society will be well functioning, right? You'll have the recognizably superior people at the top. Who will be running the show. They'll be esteemed. They'll enjoy extraordinary status and agency, and they'll be able to push your society towards great things. Then you'll have middle orders or lower orders that'll be responsible for the more technocratic or mundane kind of activities, particularly women, right? And then, there'll be the people at the very bottom, right? Aristotle characterized them as natural slaves. Burke called them the swinish multitude. Nietzsche called them the herd. You choose your synonym, and they can plug it in. And these are the kinds of people whose job it is to clean the toilets, sweep the floors, and they don't need political agency or status or any kind of veneration. What they need is to do their job, right? Because society needs them to clean the toilets and sweep the floors and to do their job. But it doesn't need to afford them any kind of dignity as a result of that. And indeed, if it did do that, then they might start getting ideas into their head, like maybe they should enjoy the same kind of status, agency, and power as the people at the top. And many on the right don't want that.
I think you alluded to it, or something you said reminded me of it. But there's been a number of attempts to sort of link these sorts of conservative core ways of viewing the world to sort of certain psychological predispositions. I'm sure you're familiar with this, but there have been studies linking it to fear of death, to disgust, to senses of insecurity. I sort of go, I don't have a hard and fast opinion on this. On the one hand, I can sort of see the intuitive logic on it. On the other, I think it's very easy to go from a little questionnaire or psychological study that shows a correlation and then jump to like some grand theory of everything from that. So what do you make of that? I don't have a hard and fast opinion on that.
Personally, I don't have any really strong opinions about this, right? I mean, I've taken a look at some psychometric literature and political psychology. It's certainly interesting, right? I tend to agree with my sister who's in cognitive science that the field of political psychology is very nascent, let's put it that way. And so while what it says is interesting, we should take it with a very significant grain of salt, right? It reminds me of what a economist once said about statistics, right? Statistics are like bikinis, right? What they reveal is intriguing, but what they conceal is absolutely necessary, right? In terms of whether or not conservatives feel a more potent sense of disgust or a more potent sense of fear, than liberals do. I'm not entirely sure that that's true. But I would say that they definitely experience a different sense of fear than liberals do, right? This is something that Corey Robin and Wendy Brown both talk about very effectively in their books, The Reactionary Mind and Ruins of Neoliberalism. Because one of the things that liberals are typically concerned about is that there are deep forms of injustices in society, and they're afraid that society might corrode or be undermined if we don't address them and with sufficient speed, right? And this is nicely embodied in the quotes of people like MLK, right, where MLK famously said, at a certain point, justice delayed is justice denied, right? We need to do something now to solve the problems that have afflicted African Americans for a long period of times by granting them civil rights. And I want to say all power to Dr. King in that respect, right? Conservatives are often deeply concerned with what Robin might call dispossession, right? And I think this is sometimes difficult for people on the political left to understand because oftentimes what we do is we talk about checking our privilege, right, or being aware of our privilege, or renouncing our privilege to try to establish a more kind of egalitarian ethos. And we see this as just the natural and just thing to do in many circumstances, right? What we aren't aware of is the fact that for many conservatives, when they conceive of themselves as victims, there's usually a very good reason why they conceive themselves as victims, because by asking them to renounce their privilege, we are asking them to give up something that has been very meaningful to them. It's not nothing to sit there and say, once upon a time, you were the head of society or the head of the family, or, the wealthiest and most powerful person in society. And we have to tell you now, that's going to be taken away from you because we're going to redistribute your wealth, or we're going to undercut those kinds of privileges, or we're going to replace patriarchal social institutions with ones that are more gender equal, right? Losing privilege is something that is a loss. And so this fear of dispossession by the left and by liberals is one that animates a huge amount of the political right. And it's what stokes an awful lot of the resentment that you see in figures like Trump, who promise effectively that what they're going to do is restore to people what has been taken from them, namely their privilege, their status, their sense of superiority over other people.
So something I've been thinking about recently, I'd be interested to get your take, because is the idea of resentment specifically within the realm of gender and sex, right? So when I started doing this podcast, I said at the beginning, and this can only have been 4 years ago, and everyone at the time said, you're being unfair. That's really like, you can have ideological disagreements, but that's like too personal. And I think it's just been borne out. Is I said a lot of this just sort of feels to me like male anger that they're not having sex, basically.
Oh yeah.
And when I said it, people sort of said that seems a bit mean and a bit like you're just being snarky. But they're more or less openly saying it now, that like a big part of our movement is, I'll put it in their language, that men today are not having the dating options or dating success that either they once did or that they're owed or whatever. And this is the one where, like, when I say stuff about it on Twitter, I always find it interesting, not that Twitter's representative, but what I get pushback on. And when I sort of say I kind of think this narrative is bullshit, I get a lot of people going, oh, but it is really hard for young men today. Let me just let you go on this, because I have a few half-finished thoughts on it. How do you think about the resentment part specifically with relation to gender and gender roles?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, especially now that we've seen the rise of what I call in a new piece, the Nietzschean right, in the United States, inspired by people like Bronze Age Pervert, or Lom 37, and a wide variety of other figures, right? So male resentment at the advances of feminism is very much a real thing, right? And it has been a real thing, I should argue, since the 19th century, right? So let's take James Fitzjames Stevens' classic manifesto, liberty, fraternity, and equality, directed against John Stuart Mills, right? So in this, Stevens addresses pretty much every aspect of Mills's thought and says that he's deeply wrong about everything, but he's really, really angry about Mills's arguments for gender equality. In fact, at various points, he says he doesn't almost want to deal with them because the idea that gender should be equal is so scandalous. But at a point in the book, he says, listen, people constantly complain, like Mill, about inequality in society, including inequality for women. But there's nothing wrong with being unequal, right? Because to obey a real superior is a great virtue in a subordinate, right? And there's nothing humbling about it, even if you're not going to possess agency as a result of it. It's a necessary social service that you perform, right? And I think that this attitude really demonstrates the way that a lot of these people now think women should behave, right? That in the event that they were to once more humble themselves in front of a real superior, right? That would be a virtuous kind of behavior on the part of women. And of course, it would be conducive to their own needs, which is to find a sexual partner, to reestablish or to establish a kind of patriarchal family structure. Well, they'll be at the head and they'll get the kind of recognition that they feel that they deserve. And I think that this is a very bad approach to understanding relationships. So I tend to agree with the great Marxist feminist Simone de Beauvoir, who famously argued that patriarchy has a corrosive effect on men and women, right? Even if women are the primary victims, because she points out that one of the reasons why men and women enter into heterosexual relationships is, of course, that we're looking for recognition from the other in order to satiate our feelings of existential mortality and to gain a sense that our life meant something, at least to another person, right? And in its most benighted forms, that's exactly what love is, right? You feel that your life has gained a rich significance by being there for someone else, fulfilling their kind of needs, and knowing that only you are capable of doing that, right? But she points out that one of the problems with patriarchy, of course, is that many men are deeply afraid that this sense of recognition will be withdrawn from them if they allow women too much freedom. Because, of course, if you allow women freedom, then they might very well choose to use that to hurt you or to leave you. And so what can end up happening is that men become domineering, men become controlling, or men adopt exactly the kind of attitude that James Stevens said, which is that your virtue is listening to me, and my virtue is telling you what to do, right? And she points out that in these kind of circumstances, and this is a Hegelian point, the very reason why people enter into interpersonal relationships with one another become distorted, because you can't demand or force another person to offer you the kind of recognition that we need from romantic relationships. If you end up doing that, all you're eventually going to produce is hatred, resentment, and indeed, a huge amount of pain. And so this is why I think that so many of these masculist movements that are emerging right now are deeply toxic and in many ways very tragic, because you can see that these people are unhappy, right? And that all their efforts in many cases to enter into healthy relationships with heterosexual women wind up failing. And they probably always will fail because until they change their attitude and adopt a more egalitarian ethos that focuses on the needs of we rather than just the needs of I, they're never going to get what it is that they need either, right? But I'm not sure how to fix this, frankly. I think that it's a very deep problem, and it's one of those circumstances where I just wish I knew what to do, really.
Yeah, and like you, I don't know what to do about that. Like, that's already as much conversation as I'm willing to have about that. And, like, I have no desire to try and become, like, a left-wing dating. For one thing, I'm not, like, qualified to do it. I haven't dated in 10 years. But, like, for another, I just don't want to, Yeah. Like, I don't know how to talk people out of that. But I think it's unfortunate. And I think they're not even helping themselves, like you say. Anyway, moving on. Where do you see as the future of all this? Because as a dual national, I sort of think about UK-US comparisons all the time, and they're often quite misleading. But like our Tory party just had a conference which was very like new right, like a lot of the tropes you see on like 4chan and so on were coming up there in what was supposed to be nominally quite a normie centre-right party not that long ago. Supposed to be, but...
Well, I mean, you say that. I mean, post-Liz Truss, it's a little hard to make that claim.
Certainly. I think for post-Brexit, it's been hard to make that claim. Yeah. But it really did make me think, and then in a similar vein, you could talk about Republican dysfunction in the House right now, or whatever their thing du jour is. It does seem to me like normie centre-right parties are seemingly a thing of the past, and that the online activists really are in control of their parties in a way that those of us who vent online about socialism could only dream of. I mean, I know predictions about the future are like always fraught, and you want to be careful with them in political analysis. But the trend I see, I interview a lot of people, and I've done a lot of stuff about like how do we step back from polarization, or how do we correct the sort of MAGAification of the Republican Party. My perspective is I don't think we're going to anytime soon. This seems like the medium run. And the question is, how do we practice democracy in the face of that? I don't know, but that's sort of where I'm increasingly landing.
Yeah, and I think it's a deeply concerning question, right? And like you, I'm not a prophet. I have long since given up trying to make predictions about how American elections or British elections are going to go. All I can say is what we can do strategically in order to try to ameliorate some of the worst possibilities that might potentially emerge. So I'll say that right now, in the United States and to a lesser extent, the United Kingdom, I think that we're seeing the emergence of a new three-legged stool, right? So the three-legged stool metaphor was a very popular one to describe the American right throughout much of the middle 20th century. And it basically referred to the kind of three planks, or the three planks of support, excuse me, of the Republican Party. Kind of anti-communism, later neoconservatism, support for free markets, which included a very large libertarian wing, and then probably the largest leg of the stool was socially conservative white evangelicals, right, who wanted to see those kinds of policies pushed, particularly anti-abortion. And all those groups are still important and significant within the Republican Party and within American conservatism. But I would argue that things have transitioned quite a bit. So what we're seeing now is a new three-legged stool that consists of national conservatism on the one hand, embodied by people like Yoram Hazony in the United States or Douglas Murray in the United Kingdom, right? Then there are various post-liberal figures who are increasingly very significant as well. Think about somebody like Patrick Deneen, Adrian Vilmule. I understand these are an integralist, but we can throw them in the family. R.R. Reno and a wide variety of others. And then we have the third leg of the stool, which is this burgeoning and very online Nietzschean right, which is fixated on a lot of the things that you were talking about: race, IQ, nationality, and especially and above all else, this feeling that men are being dispossessed by the effeminization of society. And that's deeply enamored increasingly with a lot of the rhetoric and even a lot of the ideas that emerged out of things like the German conservative revolution and, of course, Nietzsche himself.
Talk to me. No, sorry, finish first, please.
Sorry. And I want to say this new three-legged stool is where a lot of the intellectual energy is in the Anglo right. Now, again, that doesn't mean that the major intellectuals that embody the kind of old three-legged school have disappeared or that they're not trying to win back control, if you want, of the Republican Party. It's just that they don't really have a lot going for them at this point because they're widely considered to be yesterday's news. And to the extent that ideas gradually propel a party forward or what determine what a party is going to be committed to, I think that we need to be very, very concerned because I don't think that any element of this new three-legged stool is particularly appealing. And one of the things that unite all of its legs together is this commitment to illiberalism at its very core, at their very core.
Yes. Yes, I think that's right. I talked to Kevin Vallier about the book. That's another interview I have coming out. And one of the points I made there is
Kevin's a very nice guy, actually. People should I know we didn't say this before. His book, All the Kingdoms of the World, is very worth reading if people get a chance to take a look at it.
Yeah. I have been skeptical of the term illiberalism because I think you don't want to define systems of ideas by what they're not, right? Sure. Like there's a lot of groups on the left who are not really recognizably liberal. There's various sorts of communists and socialists, maybe like radical feminists or people in green political thought, but their primary motivation isn't to oppose liberalism. They have ideas and projects of their own, and in some cases they might be willing to override liberal norms or rights or values to achieve those projects, but their primary motivation isn't to oppose liberalism. Whereas a lot of the time I look at the right, I think this is true of integralism, I think it's true of, to a certain degree, a lot of the gender stuff that we've talked about, a lot of the race. It really does seem like a big primary part of the project is a hatred of, some cases fear of, and sort of desire to oppose what they see as a liberal hegemony, like incorrectly, I think, see as a liberal hegemony. But like actually illiberal isn't so wrong anymore. Like a big part of what they're about is opposing liberalism.
You're absolutely right. So one of the reasons I used the metaphor of a three-legged stool is that A, was very popular amongst conservatives, through the mid-20th century to describe their own movement. But B, because one of the reasons why conservatives throughout the 20th century described their movement in terms of a three-legged stool is that there wasn't really anything ideologically that positive that aligned social conservative white evangelicism with libertarianism, with anti-communism, neoconservatism. What united them was a contempt for New Deal liberalism, the sense of pacifism that many people aligned with that, and of course, this demand for civil rights and racial equality that many white evangelicals saw as intrinsically threatening. Right. So the American conservative movement was initially stitched together through its oppositions and its negations, rather than what united all these disparate groups together. But that agonism proved to be powerful enough to create a viable coalition that eventually led to Reagan, right? And I think that the new three-legged stool is very, very similar in this way, right? So it's absolutely the case that national conservatives and post-liberals, for example, have profound disagreements with one another. For instance, about Christianity, for instance, about whether or not we should be historical empiricists or dedicated to a kind of metaphysics. And both of these groups have deep, deep reservations about what they regard as the racism, atheism, and frankly, violent militancy of the Nietzschean right. But all these groups are connected in that they are deeply opposed to what they see as the decadent libertinism of society, that they align with liberalism and liberal values, that they see as essentially having so permeated the culture that the only thing that's left to do is to try to use state power to radically change things, right? Now, I don't know whether they'll be able to overcome their internal differences enough to create a unified platform in the long run that will serve to bring the Republican Party or the Conservative Party to power. Who knows? But I definitely wouldn't count against it, right? Since hatred of liberalism can be a very strong motivator for the political right and always has been, right? And you should never count it out.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a purely negative agenda, just things we want to destroy, and then whatever grows up in the ashes is what.
Yeah, I mean, there was a National Review article in 2020 that made this point very nicely, where the columnist was actually defending voting for Trump, and the title of the National Review article was very revealing. It was "The Only Middle Finger Available," right? And he was referring to Trump, right? And he said, "Look, I didn't necessarily support the guy in 2016. Seeing how liberals have reacted to him since then, I would turn around, walk over broken glass to vote for him right now because fuck them, right?" And that's a strong emotion.
Yeah, I think there is a feeling amongst conservatives that liberals exercising themselves politically is illegitimate. That a lot of people said, "Oh, I didn't," some version of that. "I didn't know about Trump, but then I saw everything the liberal establishment did to destroy him." What, you mean political partisans behaved like political partisans?
Yeah.
Like, name me a president in the last 100 years who hasn't had people try and throw wrenches against them just because they're not of the same party. Like, what, you think Obama was any different? Or like, but it's not legitimate when we do it. Like, when liberals exercise political power, that's a casus belli for conservatives. It's like the Supreme Court in their head is, we started all that when we rejected what's his face in the 70s,
Robert Bork in the 80s, yeah.
Yeah, 80s, yeah, Bork. But that's their casus belli there. They've just been defending themselves against liberal aggression the entire time since then. I mean, like, I stumped on the name. I doubt most liberals could name him if you put a gun to their head, but conservatives know who it is. I think there is just this thing of the other one that drives me nuts. I mean, I have mixed views on the rehabilitation of Mitt Romney, but the view that, we were just so mean to him in the 2012 election, and liberals smeared him with so many things. The right had no alternative but to turn their party over to fascists. So fuck off. Like, no one else talks like that. Liberals don't. We don't say, "Do you realise every crazed, delusional thing you said about Obama?" How did we respond to all of that? How did we respond to Trump? We nominated Joe Biden. Like, come on. Like, how did we respond to everything Bush did? We nominated no red states, no blue states, these United States guy, right? Like, no, you have choices how you respond to this. And this constant, like, hand wringing about, like, you have to understand the poor conservatives whose essential grievance is political partisans exercised a certain amount of power against us. Anyway.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's not just in the United States either. I read an op-ed by Liz Truss just a few weeks ago where she was complaining about how her government had been brought down by the radical left agenda, including, the Wall Street Journal, the Daily Telegraph, all these well-known left-wing outlets, right?
Yeah, the radical left agenda of people who manage hedge funds.
Exactly, right.
Even deeply conservative people who, even for them, Liz Truss was insane. But yes.
Yes, exactly. Well, when you tank an economy in a couple of weeks, then people tend to lose their faith in you, right? But I mean, that just goes to demonstrate how deeply built in this pathology of victimization is, right? And again, I want to stress that this isn't just a matter of historical circumstance, right? It's definitely the case that American conservatives feel that they've been targeted by liberal media, and British conservatives feel that they've been targeted by liberal media, but baked in to the pathology of the right is precisely this fear of dispossession, right? That they are entitled to a certain degree of status, agency, and power and wealth, right? Over and above other people that the left is trying to take from them, and that this is fundamentally illegitimate, right?
Yeah.
And when you start off from this premise, naturally, you're going to see any kind of politicking on the part of your allies, your adversaries, as fundamentally suspicious from the very get-go, right? And you don't need to take my word for it, right? Again, just go read somebody like Edmund Burke. And that's exactly the way that he tended to conceive and castigate the French philosophes.
Final question. I want to talk about the reaction of, we've talked about liberalism quite a lot. I want to talk about the reaction of the socialisty left, which I think we've both been variously aligned with at certain points. Sure. I used to work for WFP. I know you write for Jacobin and so on, right? I must admit, I've been I have been somewhat disappointed, I'll put it quite mildly, in how many of the leading figures of, let's call it the online socialist left, I think you know what I'm on about there,
sure, yeah.
have responded to the sort of Trump and magnification of the party. Well, let's start with the really bad cases, and then we can go to the moderate ones. It seems to me like there has been a fairly reliable pipeline from people who got very involved in Bernie 2016 to people who are now essentially Republican apologists in all but name. You could mention Glenn Greenwald, you could mention Jimmy Dore, you could mention, what's the name of his press secretary? Breonna.
I'm not sure which one you're talking about. Breonna Taylor-Joy?
Yeah, her. It looks like the Young Turks are going to follow down that rabbit hole. They're putting their feet in the water, I think. What's that about? My cynical read is it's people who have decided that their main enemy is normie liberalism and Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, and that the enemy is my friend sort of thing, or just pure grifterism, that there's a lot of money to be made attacking liberals and attacking political correctness and so on and so forth. But I must admit, I've not been thrilled by the sort of slippage we've seen on our side in how to respond to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that I'm actually spending a lot of time thinking about right now, since I'm writing my new book on liberal socialism, right? Arguing that there's a deep elect affinity between liberalism and socialism that people on the left should be aware of, right? In terms of why people on the left can sometimes feel a sense of affinity with people on the right, I think that there are two main reasons for that, right? One is the reality is that we've been operating under a system of neoliberal hegemony for about 40 years right now, and it's deeply associated with centrist figures in both parties, or multiple parties if you think about the United Kingdom, right? And both people on the far right and the far left are deeply resentful of this hegemony, want to see it torn down, albeit for extremely different reasons and with extremely different ambitions about what's going to replace it, right? But this synonymy between, far left and far right can sometimes mean that people feel a certain kinship with one another, right? And this is a very dangerous thing, as Alexander Reed Ross points out in his book Against Fascist Creep, because the far right can be especially effective at kind of coaxing leftists to adopt various reactionary positions with the promise that they'll form a united front with them against neoliberalism, right? And I think that we need to be extremely resistant to that, right? And the other reason I think is that for many leftists, right, the cultural discourse for a long time has been, and the theoretical discourse, so relentlessly critical of liberalism that for many leftists, there's almost a symmetry between liberalism or conservatism, or leftists will see them as both sides of the same coin, right? And for this reason, right, it can be very difficult to make the case for why it is that progressives should appreciate some of the accomplishments of liberalism and recognize that the fundamental leftist project shouldn't be to overcome or to do away with certain kind of liberal forms, but to improve upon them or to go beyond them in certain kinds of meaningful ways, right? And as long as we don't engage in this process of rethinking the relationship of leftism and liberalism on the left, I think that there's always going to be those who are tempted, again, to think that there's more kinship between the radicals on the left and the radicals on the right, because at least they're both radicals in the sense of wanting to do away with liberalism, whether or not that's something that we should actually want to get rid of to court.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective on this, I just feel like it's a mistake that they're so I'm not a believer in, like, say, horseshoe theory, that they're both just the same. I think that's clearly crazy.
No, I think that's a ridiculous claim. Yeah.
I think there are certain similarities that can be drawn, and where these similarities are drawn, I think they should trouble the left. I think if we're mirroring these people, we should think, okay, is this really what we believe? And one of them is seeing the liberal order as hegemonic, and I just don't. Like, I think there's the idea that everything has been based on, like, free markets for 40 years now. It just hasn't. Like, our governing institutions are a mixture of classically liberal, libertarian, authoritarian, conservative, and in the cases of the United States, bloody pre-modern in terms of our constitution, early modern, right, at least, elements. Like, as you've said, for the past 40 years, most governments of major countries have tended to be conservative, often deeply reactionary conservatives. There's certain thin liberal precepts that will get supermajority public support, like free speech or something like that. But even then, once you start digging, you'll learn that free speech, but, and a more substantive liberalism is, a very strong minority player, both at the elite and popular level, but it's not overwhelming. It's one player amongst many. Now, to be fair, I think liberalism itself has contributed to that misunderstanding, and liberalism in many ways has allowed itself in a Rawlsian sort of way to imagine itself as the referee rather than a player in the game, and has defended itself where it has felt the need to defend things like human rights law in the broadsheets and in academic journals, and hasn't really been involved in the sort of bloody knuckles business of everyday politics. And Brexit and Trump were a wake-up call to that. So I think liberalism has its share of complicity to admit, and in terms specifically of this misapprehension that it's been hegemonic, it to an extent has played into that. But I think it's a mistake both sides have made, to both the sort of far left and the far right, to assume that what we're living in could be described as a hegemonic liberal order, even by a sort of narrow classical definition of liberalism.
Sure. Yeah, and I want to be clear. I don't think that liberalism has been hegemonic. I think that neoliberalism has been hegemonic economically, right? Now, there's a variety of different reasons for that. We don't have to get into it right now, right? But on the point about how liberalism has failed to inspire recently. I think that's absolutely correct, right? Sam Moyn released a very good book on this recently, where he was talking about Cold War liberalism, where he discusses how, starting in the 1950s and the 1960s, many liberals internalized a huge number of conservative arguments about human nature, the impossibility of achieving perfection in society, and indeed the sense of caution about any kind of progressive social schemes and that had long been the purview of the right. And this later became reflected in the kind of doctrines that were espoused by people like Tony Blair or Bill Clinton, or even Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton to a lesser extent, where the idea was that a liberal shouldn't be too ambitious in what they try to put forward as social policies, because any kind of ambitious program carries significant risks with it, right? And I think in part because of this reticence to offer an inspiring vision for the future, many people just turned away from liberalism. They saw it as passé. They saw it as, basically a kind of vulgar centrism. They associate it with technocracy or with a lack of principle. And naturally, things like the far right become very appealing in those kind of circumstances. So what I am hopeful for in the future is that what we'll see is a conciliation between the more visionary aspects of liberalism and the kind of natal democratic socialist movements that are appearing in the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States, and that we will commit ourselves to a broadly liberal program that is respectful of the rights of individuals, but also takes very seriously problems like economic inequality, environmental degradation, gender inequality, and a huge variety of other issues, and that liberals will put forward, in alignment with democratic socialists, transformative policies that seek to address these kinds of concerns. And I think that Moyne is absolutely right that if liberals fail to do this, it's quite unlikely that we will see our creed survive. But that's fine, because frankly, survival isn't good enough, right? What we need is to inspire people to dedicate their loyalty to liberalism. And that's why we really failed over the last couple of years.
I think we should close. I think, I've long been a critic of what you might call third way, Blair, Clinton type liberalism. There's a good essay by Frieden in his Ideologies and Liberal Languages book, who sort of asks, is this even recognisably liberal? And he says it is, but it's a very thin sort of liberalism.
Oh, very much, yeah.
I think that's about right. I'm, in one sense, more optimistic and in one sense less, because I think liberalism has changed quite fast and quite rapidly, not just in sort of being pulled left by, say, the Sanders movement, although to an extent it has been, but just the thing itself has changed. Mainline elite American liberalism is quite different, very different now than it was 10 years ago, radically different than it was 30 years ago, and in a direction I think is largely positive. I think it's become more openly egalitarian. It's become much less afraid of the sort of just spend money to fix problems type thinking. I think there's been an element which weirdly hasn't been communicated, but an element in how you think about corporate power and antitrust in the Biden administration that's sort of overtly freedom as non-domination. It's sort of overtly following that line of thought. They just haven't really talked about it much for whatever reason. But I'm much more comfortable being a sort of voter in the Democratic Party now than I was under the Obama years, and certainly more than we could go on about Clinton, right? But then I also, because I'm sort of online too much, do worry that the sort of inter-left squabbling has kind of continued to deteriorate and is not. I think I know a lot of people who abstained from 2016 and very, very, very reluctantly, like they literally said, I felt dirty, voted for Biden in 2020. Mm-hmm. And I think where they will be in 2024 is very much up in the air, and that's like one part of the coalition that we'll need. So on the one hand, I it's not perfect by any stretch, but I like more where mainstream elite American liberalism is now. And in some senses, it's almost sort of got ahead of how it's communicating itself, and it's certainly got ahead of how it's being perceived by the far left. I don't think like our socialist friends quite credit how much Biden is different from Obama. But on the other, I do just worry about our ability to hold it all together. I like the direction of change. I don't know if the 2020, just to take one example, but it's symptomatic of a broader thing, if the 2020 coalition holds into 2024.
Yeah, I can agree with you, right? I mean, I do think the Biden administration has been an improvement on the Obama administration, or at least I would have said that until recently, with a lot of the stuff that's going on in Gaza and Biden's kind of carte blanche to the Israeli state. But I think that what's really been missing in a lot of the public discourse that's been going on has been a signature policy that people can associate with the Biden administration that fundamentally changes people's perceptions of how the Democratic Party is operating, right? So let's take something like Obamacare, right? Obamacare was a deeply deficient policy in many, many respects, right? Still is, right? But at least it was a signature policy that people came to associate with the administration. And it did change the discourse in the United States around healthcare because it put serious pressure on those who insisted for a long time that there was really nothing wrong with tens of millions of people being uninsured and potentially dying as a result of that, because that's just the way that the market operates, right? Obamacare kind of forced those people to say, well, we're going to come up with some kind of alternative that will get these people insured, or at least get them healthcare in some way, shape, or form, because the de facto consensus now is that nobody should go without healthcare in the United States, even though many people now do, right? Because there's been no way to translate this consensus into more meaningful kinds of policy change than the kinds that were advanced by Obamacare, something like Medicare for all, right? Bernie Sanders' program. And I think that the Biden administration needs similar kinds of policy that will animate people's imagination, that will mobilize liberals to fight on its behalf, and that once implemented would be very difficult for conservative groups to get rid of, because it would be enduringly popular. We saw something kind of like that in 2022 when the Dobbs decision was issued, and it was the midterms, and many people mobilized to try to inhibit Republican groups from advancing anti-abortion legislation. But these are reactive moves, right? There needs to be something positive and constructive that's put forward. And I'm hoping that if there is another Biden administration, that he will put forward some kind of visionary policy of this sort that would change the landscape of American politics. What that would be, we just have to wait and see. My hope would be something, again, like Medicare for all.
We should close, but I mean, this is a conversation we could keep going on forever. Where I land with that is perhaps more pessimistic. I very much wish that theory of change was true, but Obama without like a big Biden without a big policy with his name on, like you said, did a lot better in the midterms than Obama did, where Obamacare became a sort of albatross around his neck. I also am just like very much dispirited, and I don't really know where to go from something like the failure of the child tax credit to get extended, right?
Yes.
Like, because I think we have all sort of bought in for a long time now that the way you do social change is you do big popular things and you dare people to undo them. And that was big, it was popular, and it just went away with no political consequence whatsoever, Like, I just, to some extent, like, solve the kitchen table issues, put money in people's pockets, improve material conditions, and you'll reap the political rewards. It does seem like we're doing a lot of that. Maybe socialists would rather we do it like much, much bigger, but compare where America is now to where my country is. America is doing all right economically. It is doing all right by the working poor. You would rather be there. You would rather be working a serving job in America than working one here, right? Like,
yeah, actually, I was just reading some statistics recently which showed that while, on the surface, Britain looks like a very rich country, if you go outside of London, it's actually one of the poorest countries in Europe, which is really quite startling, especially post-Brexit.
As someone who's in one of the less developed parts of the north, yeah, it's not at all surprising. Yeah, I guess my point is like I think I really want the idea that like you do these big popular things and the rest will follow to be true. It just sort of seems like the way we win elections now is by doing what the British Labour Party does and promising absolutely nothing except to be less psychotic than the other people. And then you get elected in, and then you become unpopular, and then you lose again, and we're going to be flip-flopping between those two forever. I don't know. I don't know what I'd advise Biden to do differently. I really don't. Like, I can think of things like on a moral level, I'd prefer he do differently, but just in terms of winning elections, the depressing fact may be that the policy offer that the Democrats are putting forward is about calibrated right to the electorate that where we are. I mean, people like you and me need to remember we've got to be in like the top 10 percentile of like left views, maybe where the Democrats are now is about calibrated optimally to win elections, and maybe it won't be enough.
Yeah, it's hard to say, right? I mean, political strategy, again, isn't my field of interest, right? And certainly there's a huge amount of empirical data that political campaigners and political strategists are privy to that I'm not, right? In terms of whether or not the median American voter would be supportive of more transformative social policies, I think that they would when it comes to something like Medicare for all, right? I think that we've seen a tremendous growth in support for it over the last couple of years, largely fomented by the Bernie Sanders campaign, but there are other catalysts there as well. And I do think that where I differ from you a little bit is implementing a policy like that would really demonstrate that Democrats or progressive parties are capable of enacting meaningful change and fulfilling an agenda that they were elected to fulfill. And that might restore people's confidence in these parties in a way that hasn't really been the case for many, many decades now. And we can go back a little bit further if you want to see evidence of this. So during the 1930s, of course, you saw FDR advance something like the New Deal legislation, right? Now, this took a wide variety of different forms. The Wagner Act is probably the crown jewel and the whole New Deal framework, right? But the excitement generated by this idea of a New Deal and changing the kind of parameters of society was something that was extremely important in catalyzing support for FDR. And it's one of the reasons he ended up winning something like 4 elections. Now, of course, it wasn't the only reason. Charisma played a part. Weak opponents played a part. The Depression and the Second World War obviously played a very, very big part, right? But I think that this inspiring quality was also important. Or we can talk about something like the NHS post-Beveridge report in the United Kingdom, right? It's worth noting that the NHS currently is the most beloved institution in the United Kingdom, even more so than the Crown. And I always like to tell people that because, of course, the most socialist institution in the United Kingdom is the one that everybody tends to have warm, fuzzy feelings for. But as you know, the NHS was deeply opposed when it was first introduced, including by some members of the Labour Party that thought it was going too far. And it was Welsh radicals in particular that really pushed for it. And then once it entered into the kind of social fabric of the country, by the 1980s, even somebody like Margaret Thatcher was piously declaring her allegiance to it and insisting that however much she decided to steal milk from little babies, the NHS would still be safe in her hands, right? So I guess I'm just not as confident as you are that some kind of signature policy of this sort couldn't have the same effect. Although, of course, that's just speculation on my part. We'll have to see if somebody actually introduces one, if it pulls off the kind of trick that I'm talking about. Maybe I'll be proven wrong.
Yeah, I'm not confident that it wouldn't. I'm just not confident that it would. And it's not a strategic position I land in with any degree of relish. I would very much like to be living in a world where the way you win is you do NHSs. And although even on the NHS front, there's now a bipartisan consensus that it essentially needs to be creepingly privatized until it doesn't exist anymore. So there's that, Yeah, yeah. I mean, hopefully you are right. I was disappointed and dismayed by how little some of the stuff Biden has accomplished legislatively. Because although there's not a big signature thing, it is probably the most legislatively productive first term we've seen in quite some time.
Oh
And
yes,
it's,
no, there's no denying that.
yeah, hasn't moved the needle really at all. Um, I think we can also do a thing where, like, we, as sort of very political activisty types, make what appeals to us as the key to winning elections, and
Oh
like
yeah.
make excitement the key currency. And like again from the UK, Jeremy Corbyn inspired a lot of excitement. Young people really liked that. That was a genuine promise of transformational change. And it did all right in 2017. It didn't win, did okay. And then it was one of the most catastrophic failures of an election run by the left in 100 years in 2019. Um, I think excitement isn't everything. I think excitement is very much the currency for people like you and me. And it's not the be all and end all, but then where do you finish that thought? Because then, okay, if you're not preaching to people like you and me, who are you preaching to? I don't think norming liberalism has found a brilliant answer for what its positive message and agenda is yet. I'm not sure it's ours. I'm not sure ours plays, honestly, but they need something. And at the moment, I'm not quite seeing what it is.
Yeah, you could very well be right about that, right? So Matthew Goodwin and Eat Well wrote a very good book on the motivations behind populist surges in the United Kingdom and in the United States, right? Talk about Brexit and Trump. Both of them are conservative social scientists, so I don't agree with a lot of their substantive positions, but that's neither here nor there. But they found that one of the primary motivations for why people supported these kinds of populist movements was they felt that the institutions that nominally were supposed to govern them weren't actually accountable to them in any kind of meaningful way, and that people have seen their quality of life decay over a long period of time, or at least not improve. And the state seemed to be doing very little to try to actually solve any of their problems, while it was very, very active in trying to solve the problems of various other kinds of elites within society, right? Particularly neoliberal elites. And this data set has been well confirmed, or these facts have been well confirmed, not just by Eatwell and Goodwin, but also by people like Thomas Piketty and Martin Gilens and a huge variety of different others, right? So I think that fundamentally, the reason why I turn to something like an inspiring social policy as one of the answers for the problem that liberalism now finds itself stuck in isn't necessarily because a policy like that is exciting, but because it would demonstrate this kind of accountability to the citizenry by showing that it is possible for liberal policies to actually push forward legislation that makes a meaningful difference in the lives of people, and that is recognized as doing so, right? And that's not to say that the kind of more tailored, policy proposals and tailored monies that are allocated by the Biden administration don't make an impact, right? It's just that it doesn't change this perception that led to the emergence of various populist movements in the first place. And I think that we can see that right now, since Biden, despite the fact, like you said, that he's had a very successful legislative term and that the economy seems to be doing pretty well, his support hovers, between 40 and 50%. And there's some polls that really disturbingly show Trump potentially winning an election against him, which is quite shocking when you think that he very well could be in a jail cell by next year and be appointed president of the United States, right? So I don't think that we've changed this perception that Goodwin and Eatwell diagnosed. I think that a signature policy is one of the ways about going about doing that. But it could very well be that it needs to be something else, right? Maybe a more charismatic leader who embodies the ethos or spirit of liberalism could be what we're looking for, right? Obama kind of embodied a lot of those characteristics in 2008, and he won big. Maybe that's it, right?
Obama looks like someone you'd cast in a TV show to be president, and Biden kind of doesn't,
Yeah.
And just like stupid shit like that, I think actually does make a difference.
Oh, it's very unfortunate, but it's true, right? I mean, take Justin Trudeau in my own country, right? He won big in 2015. A lot of the shyness kind of come off him since then. But I'm never going to forget when I knew he won. It's because I was talking to the mother of the girl I was dating at the time, and she was like, he's just so handsome and he's so polished and he's so smart, right? Just imagine what it'd be like if Canada had a leader like him, right? Kind of flustered and just very impressed by him. And from a kind of elitist standpoint, it's very easy to be like, oh God, right? You should be looking at the substance of their policies, not how they present them. But that's not the way things work in politics, right? Charisma really does matter and always has, and I think it's
not at the presidential level, but like at the sort of Senate gubernatorial House level, that's actually been punching in our favor recently, because back in the day, in the Bush years, it was kind of like, Bush, you'd want to have a beer with him. These liberals are kind of weird, right? Now it's the Conservatives who are running just the biggest fucking freaks in the universe for their candidates. So, like, who you would want to have a beer with question has actually kind of swung to our side, I think. I mean, I think the other thing.
I think that's a big reason why Bernie Sanders was so popular, right? Yeah. This is one of the things that I always say that's problematic about the left's efforts to kind of brand itself, right? The part of the problem with the left being relegated to academia and the cultural sphere for a long time is in academia and the cultural sphere, what you always want to stress is the novelty of whatever you're presenting, the radicalness of it, because those are the kind of things that win you attention in art, in academia, right? Doing something new, right? That's not the kind of thing, though, that really gets you a lot of points in politics. What you want to do in politics is change the kind of hegemonic contours that you're operative in and suggest that whatever it is that you're putting forward is actually a common sense solution to a problem that's just been denied for such a long period of time, because it's just never registered with people that this is the obvious way of actually solving a lot of our problems. And I think Bernie Sanders was really effective at shifting the Overton window in the United States by making at least certain kinds of left-wing policies seem commonsensical in a way they didn't before. And this actually speaks to one of your earlier questions about why some people on the left aren't necessarily behind these kinds of movement. I think because aesthetically, that's a very different approach than what many of them are used to, which is to almost invariably present themselves as countercultural figures who are completely against anything that seems too mainstream, and they almost take a pride in their own marginalization because that's an indication of how far off the beaten path they actually are.
Yeah. No, 100%. I think a lot of people's so-called left radicalism is about a sense of self. It's about how you want to project yourself. It's a bit like, do you wear a t-shirt or a collared shirt? Well, it's not just about your comfort. It's about like, what image are you sending to the world, right? I think a lot of people experience their politics through that, who, apart from maybe Medicare for All, couldn't tell you with a gun to their head, like what the substantive differences are between Bernie and Biden. I think a lot of people experience it that way. And for them, Bernie Sanders is a bridge too far sometimes. And so Biden, who is the most progressive president of our lifetimes, but does it in such a sort of like normie way. Because Biden's superpower is that he can be reasonably progressive relative to sort of the center of gravity in elite spaces, but he's perceived as being much more moderate than the party as a whole. That's both his strength and weakness. It like picks him up some swing voters, but it also, I think, is just like, never even mind substance. It's just not the political aesthetic that a lot of people in our camp like. And it's not the image of themselves that they want to portray to the world. They don't want to say, I'm like a Biden person. That's just like not how they want to be perceived. I think ultimately
it's kind of like sitting there and being like, I like vanilla yogurt, right? Vanilla yogurt is, my go-to snack, right? You're kind of just like, oh God, what kind of person even says that, right?
Yeah. I guess the final thing is, I think it is also just talking of perception. I think the media has, and I don't know how to change this, the mainstream media, never even mind the new media and people online, your Ben Shapiro's, like your New York Times and your Washington Post have really let us down here, both in how Trump was covered and in, like, as far as I can tell, there's been just so little reporting on what accomplishments the Democrats have done. And the main thing has just been whinging about inflation, which went up for a bit, but it went up everywhere. Like, I think the media very much have a thing where they want to be impartial, and to that it means equally critiquing both sides. And that's been just a huge problem over the last 8 years in America. And I don't know what you do about it. I don't know how you shake them out of that.
Yeah, I sincerely don't know about that, right? I mean, there's no doubt that the kind of media ecosystem that we inhabit right now plays a major role in abetting the rise of something like Trumpism, right? Now, there are a lot of different dimensions to this. I think part of that is because Trump himself is very skilled at being able to solicit attention to himself. And this is where I think that progressives and liberals seriously underestimated his skills as a political operative. Now, I don't want to suggest that Trump is some kind of political genius, the way that he likes to present himself, the way that some Republicans like to think of him. It's worth noting that he's only won 1 out of 4 elections so far, and that was by a fairly narrow margin, and he lost the popular vote in that election, right? So it's not exactly like he's enjoyed bullish popularity, right? But he spent a lot of time in TV, and he is very good at self-promoting, at making the discourse at any given moment about him, what he's doing, and how people are responding to him, right? And Hillary Clinton was just deeply ineffective at establishing herself as a kind of presence independent of his gravity, right? And sometimes she even kind of consciously leaned into that, like you said, by almost seeming not to campaign in 2016 and just assuming that Trump's craziness would eventually just tire everyone out, and that she would ride the crest of normie opinion to victory smoothly and easily without ever needing to do anything, right? I think that that was a serious mistake, right? And I think that the American media played its role in catalyzing his emergence, precisely by feeding so much into these impulses and by granting him a huge amount of the coverage and a huge amount of the attention that he wanted, right? Whether or not they're going to do the same kind of thing again in 2024, or whether or not he has the same kind of star power and charisma after he's lost, quite a few elections, not to mention it looks like he's going to wind up in jail. Very hard to say, right? Personally, having watched Trump recently, I do think that he looks older, more tired, and that his message has lost some of its novelty. It's kind of like listening to, any other kind of boomer band, right? Yeah, he's coming out and he's playing the hits again, and, they're familiar, and I'm sure that, the fans will enjoy them, but they're not exactly fresh any longer, right? If anything, they're kind of comforting, I imagine, for many on the right, precisely because of their familiarity, right? But that's, again, just the sense or the vibe I get, and it could very well turn out that I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I do think there's a lot of people who aren't, we're talking about the sort of left people who are by no means in love with Biden, but really at the end of the day, if they abstained in 2016 and got Trump, they voted in 2020 and got Biden, I'm not 100% confident that they'll show up, but really, if that's your choice, are you really going to vote for West or whatever? I think Trump does have a way of focusing opinion in that way, but we shall see.
Oh yeah, I mean, listen, I'm one of those people who was very critical of Joe Biden in 2020. I supported the Bernie Sanders campaign. I still support, Senator Sanders and the squad. I was living in Canada and it was the pandemic, right? But I sent in every bit of money I could, to various magazines and various kind of activists, tweeted, wrote articles and all that kind of stuff. But then, by the time October came around, I released an op-ed saying hey, listen, you should vote for Biden because even if you're like me, a Sanders supporter, and you're not exactly happy with everything that's on offer, boy, oh boy, is that a lot better than another Trump administration, which could very well be calamitous for the country, especially given, the COVID pandemic, and, even more so given that he seems to be leaning into a lot of his more authoritarian impulses. And then, January 6th happened and all that was affirmed, right? So I do think that we need to ensure that the perfect doesn't get in the way of the good here. Noam Chomsky said something very smart in 2020 when he was arguing that people should vote for Biden, which is that, look, politics doesn't end after an election. It begins, right? You win an electoral victory. You prevent the worst possible outcome from occurring. You gain a few things by electing a moderate and a centrist who, like you said, has some progressive inclinations. And then you do your best to try to push them in a more progressive direction. So that would be my kind of strategic sense of this right now.
Yeah. And, isn't the socialist left, aren't we the ones saying all the time, electoral politics isn't the start and end of this? It isn't.
Exactly.
It's a part. You do it for an hour every 4 years. Or if me and you obsessively follow every last detail, but you don't need to do that. No one's asking you to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, hey, like, I don't want to make it all out to be doom and gloom. Like, look at what's going on this year when it comes to the big strikes that took place when it came to the Writers Guild and the UAW and the level of support that was shown for that, or unionization at Starbucks. I have to say that in my lifetime, right, I've never seen this level of support in the Anglosphere for unions and unionization, right? Now, whether or not that's going to translate into higher union density in Anglo countries, or whether or not it's sustainable in the long run, who knows? But it's definitely a positive sign, right? And I think sometimes leftists don't give ourselves enough credit for the accomplishments that we are able to achieve. And I think changing the public's perception on unions and the labor movement has been one of those, and it's been a big one over the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And to wrap, across the board, I think a lot of spaces in the left are much more positive than when I was becoming politically aware. I think mainline elite liberalism is in a much better place. I think sort of democratic socialism is much more visible now compared to who was that when we were growing up? Who was there, like Dennis Kucinich or something?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even know what socialism meant until I was about 12 years old, and the only thing that I remember about it at that point was my mom told me it's like, oh, that's what they do in Soviet countries, right?
Yeah, I think it's been a bit wonderfully chaotic. I think the fact that it went from nothing to a major thing has meant we've put some people out there who are not quite ready for prime time. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the world is a better place for having people like AOC in it, right? And political philosophy, I think the field as a whole is producing much more interesting stuff than it was when I did my MA on it, and it was like Rawls, Nozak, and commentary. I think we're in a much better place now. I think we're also in a place where the risks are much higher, what we're competing against is people who will actually kill us all, if they have their way. So I think the risks are a lot higher, but from elite academic opinion to elite liberal opinion to on the ground socialism, they're all in a better place now than they were 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with you, right? So I had a debate just a few weeks ago with Matt Smolinski, right, who's a left libertarian or bleeding heart libertarian, right? And if you told me, 5 years ago that I would have ended up agreeing with a lot of things that a libertarian has to say, or that he would end up agreeing with me because that's what ended up happening, I would have told you that you were crazy, right? But it turned out, that on things like unionization, voluntary unionization at the very least, providing something like a UBI, there was a lot of common ground, right? And I think that that's part and parcel of the shift that you are talking about, where many people who belong to the liberal family recognize that there are deep problems in our society that require big fixes, right? And I think that there's a lot of exciting theoretical and practical work that's being done precisely to offer visionary solutions right now by people like, Anderson, by people like, Tomasi. The list and list goes on, right? So at least from an intellectual standpoint, I'm more excited than I have been in some time.
Awesome. Let's end it on that unusually optimistic note. I'll let you have the final word if you want it. We touched on so many varied things. So if there's something I said that you want to pick up on or something you said you want to build on or any closing thoughts, and then do you just want to remind the audience where to follow you and get your book?
Oh, sure. So you can add me on Twitter at Matt Paulfroth, or you can email me mattmcmanus300@gmail.com. And the book that I just released is The Political Right and Equality, Turning Back the Tide of Egalitarian Modernity for Routledge Press. You can get it on Amazon or on the Routledge website. And I'm working on a book right now, The Political Theory of Liberal Socialism. That's a kind of sequel, spiritually at least, to C.B. Macpherson's The Political Theory of Possessive Individualism. I'm really excited about it, and I hope when it comes out, maybe later next year, people are excited to see what's on offer as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today.
No problem. Great talking to you.